Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional from Gurgaon, the same city that I live in, Gurgaon, India, Radhika Bhalla. Radhika, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Radhika is an organizational psychologist. So, Radhika, before we talk about the work that you're doing, tell me about your own journey in brief and what inspired you to specialize in psychometrics and talent profiling.
So I think I fell in love with psychology in class 11. I took it as a subject against math. And wanted to pursue psychology. So I did psychology honors from DU. At that time, I think like most youngsters was very fascinated with clinical psychology. But during that time, I also got exposed to organizational and industrial psychology. When I had a choice in my master's to specialize, I had a favorite professor, and he was a professor of organizational behavior and psychology. And that is why I chose that specialization, purely to be taught by him. That was my only desire. But in those 2 years of studying the subject, the passion grew, and I decided to build a career in OB, or organizational psychology. In my second year, I did a 9-month internship with this organization called SmithKline Beecham, which is now then became GSK Consumer, and now obviously doesn't exist in that form. And the opportunities I got there in those 9 months gave me hope that there is an opportunity for psychologists like me to contribute to well-being in organizations, and also to bring in a lot of human-centered design in organizational processes. But the design and the research work that I wanted to do was not possible in a large multinational, which is fairly siloed in terms of roles and in terms of what a psychologist can bring to the table. So I moved into consulting in the year 2000, where I co-founded Quadrangle Consulting with my partner, Jyoti Grover. And we started with a mission. And I'm very proud to say that we've stayed very close to that mission, is to bring psychology to life for organizations throughout our consulting work.
Right. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So let's now talk about the work that you're doing. But let me start with a very basic question, and I'm sure you've been asked this many times. Can you explain the role of organizational psychology in today's corporate world?
So I think there are two impact areas that organizational psychologists make. One, all processes in the organization, whether they are designed towards employees or towards customers, deal with humans. How do you bring in human-centered design to your organizational programs?
Right.
So as an organizational psychologist, you bring in the human back into the process. From an employee standpoint, if you look at today's organization, there is so much happening around engagement. There are 3 generations at work. There is well-being. And there, as an organizational psychologist, the fact that you understand human behavior, you can help organizations understand their talent profiles, understand their consumer profiles better, and then design programs that can best nurture the engagement, the retention, and the share of wallet.
Interesting. And Radhika, what are the biggest challenges facing organizations in terms of talent differentiation?
I think there are multiple. One clearly is the generation itself. So the way earlier you had a unilateral, very unidimensional understanding of talent, which was linked to potential. People do well, they perform well in their jobs. You give them higher growth, they will stay with you. You can consider them high potential. Today, when you have people of different generations, not everybody wants the classical growth. People are bringing in conversations of purpose, identity. And therefore, that classical model of saying a high performer will want growth or a high performer will become high potential itself is changing, because every generation has a different requirement in their career.
Right.
The second challenge is that performance in the current environment does not guarantee performance in a future environment, because the current and the future itself is so drastically different. Technology has changed the landscape completely.
Right.
So just because you are a high performer today does not mean you will be a high performer in the future. So when organizations are differentiating talent, They have to take into account generational differences, individual identity and purposes coming in the way. Current performance is no more the only indicator of potential. And the last one is that even if you have differentiation, how are you going to retain those people? Because retention, again, is one of the biggest challenges that organizations face today.
Very interesting. So when I was reading about you, I was fascinated that you also run a master class,
Yes,
which is psychology to business.
yes.
How have these master classes evolved since their inception, and what do you cover?
So, these master classes, I started these master classes in 2015, and they arose from one of my own pain areas, which is when I'm doing a consulting project with a client and I'm bringing in a lot of frameworks from psychology. My clients don't understand the psychology, right? So they cannot understand the assumptions I'm making. They cannot understand the solutions that I want to bring to the problem statement. So I started to gather them in a room at very initial stages of my project to educate them about the framework of psychology that I would use. So just as an example, if we are designing a sales incentive program, then I would want the leaders to come into a room and I would take them through the theories of motivation and tell them how my design will pick from these elements. These conversations and these sessions, which were really tea sessions, started to become very popular, and clients wanted me to bring these not just to the internal design team, but also to larger audiences within their own setups. So just as an example, if I'm working on a hiring process to predict retention, then I would conduct a class on what is retention and how does retention work, and therefore what should we assess when we are recruiting people. So what started off as a small group conversation started to become a 3 or 4 hour masterclass for larger managerial populations within a client setup. Slowly, I started to get references from clients about other organizations who didn't want to engage with me as a consultant necessarily, but they wanted the masterclass. So the masterclasses then became a separate product that I designed and I took it to market. And they're also available in retail format. I've done classes in NASCOM. I've held my own open programs where a lot of people from different walks of life attend these. What I cover in these classes are current pain points of organizations. One of my most popular classes, and after doing hundreds of them, they're still popular, is getting into the mind of Gen Z, getting into the mind of the millennial. Very, very motivating classes, the theory of motivation. People love that because everybody is struggling with motivating their workforce. Some of these topics, I think, have stood test of time. If I do have a window where I'm doing it for an organization, then I like to spend some time and understand what their pain points are and what are the topics that concern them the most regarding people and leaders. And then I've designed a class around it.
Very interesting. So now moving forward, when you talk psychometrics, I've been hearing psychometrics ever since I started working in 1979. Yes. And yet it's something which is to remain within the domain of the human resources function. My question is, what are some common misconceptions about psychometrics when it comes to the corporate world?
So originally, when psychometrics was designed in the field of psychology itself, it was to create some kind of a scientific measure to evaluate certain dimensions of human behavior, which would take very long to discover if you were just having a conversation. And then this idea got picked up by organizations to say, okay, so if I have to understand a person, I need not necessarily rely on the inexperience of a line manager who does not understand behavior, but I can use a tool or a psychometric that gives me some insights.
Right.
So what started as a very facilitative tool started to become an end in itself. So where we are today, very sadly, is instead of honing the skill of interviewing or honing the skill of having conversations, people will find the shortcut and use psychometrics as a shortcut, get information about people and then box them in a category. So that is one of the biggest misconceptions, because psychometrics is one data point, but what you will discover about people by engaging with them and observing conversations and having engagement and conversations cannot be replaced. So psychometrics is not an end. It is a data point that should be explored.
Right.
So it pains me when people use psychometrics as an end to box people or take a decision about them. The second misconception is that, oh, one tool is better than the other. This was true maybe a decade back, where different tools did not have the same level of investment in their research. Today, if you look at commercially available tools, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of the popular ones are fairly equal in their reliability, validity. The user interface may be slightly different, the framework will be different, but they're all reliable. So the narrative around one tool, and that becomes like the master tool and the main opinion maker in the space of cognitive or personality assessment, is also a misconception. And the third is that these tools are going to help me solve all my talent problems and I need not do more. So plugging a tool in a process is somehow the cheapest measurable improvement you can make to it. So hiring process improve karna hai, we will attach a tool to it. It works really fine. But that may not be the case.
Right.
So these, I think, will be the three
very
most common misconceptions.
Very interesting. And, so one part is using psychometrics for evaluation, but the other part is also qualitative research.
Yes.
How does qualitative research contribute to to solving workforce challenges?
So a quantitative research obviously has things like a questionnaire. So when you make a questionnaire, you predefine the things you want to measure.
Absolutely.
In a qualitative research, you are trying to understand a phenomena. You're not predefining any of its dimensions. That is the beauty of the qualitative research. So let's take an example. We are looking at retention. So your problem statement is, why are people attriting? In a quantitative research, you will already put parameters like, okay, compensation, maybe it's my culture, maybe it is peer pressure, maybe my job is very boring, maybe it's the generation. But in a qualitative research, you are just understanding, how do people make a decision to leave an organization and keep the landscape open for the stories and narratives to emerge. And what is the most interesting in qualitative research is when you interact with people with a very simple understanding of, I want to understand how you look at careers and what makes you decide to stay or go. While people may have different stories and narratives, you will find common threads in those narratives across 50 or 60 people. And that common story is so powerful that it can give an organization an insight into what they can do to plug the hole. So in qualitative research, you are allowing people to bring their personal stories and narratives into the problem to help you understand the problem from their perspective. It is a longer process. It puts organization in a discomfort because you cannot make a slide that says 10% people said X, because percentages, percentiles, normal probability curve does not apply to a qualitative research, but it will help you understand a phenomena really well and give you a unique perspective to it.
Fascinating. My next question is can you explain the concept of multi-raters and its significance in leadership development?
So multi-rater is one of the most powerful tools for self-reflection and awareness, because it allows you to get an understanding of how you're perceived by others. A leadership behavior all happens in a social context, which includes so many stakeholders, my peers, my manager, my direct reports, my customers. So the multi-rater actually allows me to gather information about how I'm perceived by others. And that's a very powerful mirror when leaders are wanting to understand themselves and the impact that their behavior has on their effectiveness and on the effectiveness of others. The challenge with a multi-rater is, when you initiate a multi-rater, as a person, you need to be in a space where you're ready to receive diverse perspectives. You need to be in a psychological space to receive feedback. Very often when organizations run a 360, they run it like a process. It is forced upon people.
Right.
To say, oh, as a part of this, I'm running a 360. You can select your people, or we can select reviewers, and they will start giving you feedback. But nobody checks whether the receiver is ready to take feedback or the giver is ready to give feedback. But if you create a psychological space where people are willing to give and take feedback, then it is a very powerful mirror for self-awareness. The other is, it allows you to make choices about how you want to be perceived. So when you look at your 360, when a leader looks at his or her 360 data, it is not about accepting what everybody is saying. It's about reflecting on experiences that I'm creating and then making a choice about, do I want to create this experience? If I don't, then these are the changes I will need to make. So it's a very empowering process if it's done well.
And how do you measure success of a lot of the work that you are doing in improving workforce performance?
So in the work that I do, I typically start with the problem statement, to which we then co-create a ROI with the client. Let me give you an example. If you are making a sales incentive program, a classical ROI will be, okay, so it should motivate people to do well. My ROI from a psychology standpoint will be, if I'm making a sales incentive program, then did I convert a low performer into a high performer? Because very often the high performers will continue to get the incentive, the low performers will not, and the big divide will happen. So is my sales incentive plan converting some of the average or low performers into better performance? And do I have something to offer for them? So that would be one of the ROIs that I will create.
Right.
Similarly, if we are working on attrition, then retention will become an ROI. How we will define retention will be very different from just an overall index of saying, okay, my attrition should go down from, let's say, from 20 to 18. But to say, can I reduce attrition in the first 60 days, and then in the 90 days, then in the 180 days, because the levers will be very different.
Right.
So when we look at the ROI, we define the milestones and the measures with the client to check whether the needle is moving.
Okay. Fascinating. The other thing that I wanted to ask you was about technology. You know, technology has made deep inroads into human resources. Artificial intelligence is being used. How is technology impacting the field of organizational psychology?
Tremendous impact. So when we look at psychology and we try and understand human behavior, the social context is a very important pillar within which behavior is understood. Okay. Right. Where you come from, what values you hold, what your social economic status is, are very powerful demographic indicators that help us understand the assumptions you have about life. Now, earlier, this social context was what? It was my family, what my mother and father did, my siblings, where I worked, who my friends were, what my friends were doing, where I lived. Today, it is my social life on technology. My influencers are unknown people on Facebook, on, it's not called Twitter now, X, and so many other platforms. So today, when we have to understand human behavior, technology is a social context for me, where there are alternate lives that people live, where their influences rest, where they demonstrate a lot of behavior. So understanding their social life on technologies become a very big input into my work. The other is how I take my work to people. So if you have to run something as simple as an assessment, technology has enabled that for you to run that assessment program or run that development program and give experiences to people, large audiences across the world.
Right.
The third is, which is a very dark side, is everybody's become a psychologist. There's this whole rise of pseudo-psychology.
I agree.
So very often when I run my master classes, I have a few pseudo-psychologists in the class who have read and educated themselves partially on some concepts. And that poses a challenge because I'm not dealing with just curious ignorance. I'm dealing with curious misinformation as well. So I think those will be the three.
Well said. And as the old saying goes, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So I think I have time for 2 or 3 more questions. My next question is on cultural diversity. And, and as a country, we are an incredibly diverse country.
Absolutely.
How does cultural diversity impact your approach to talent profiling and assessments?
We are so diverse that it is so hard to ignore culture. So when I do research, even when I make competencies or I do research or I run assessments, our north, south, I mean, just to put it very broadly, north, south, east, west are like 4 different countries.
Correct.
Rural, urban, suburban is a clear divide. So I'll give you an example. Relationships are important. Relationship and interpersonal is very, very important in getting work done in India. Now, this is a generic statement. How interpersonal is used in North, South, East, West is very different. The nature of those relationships is very different. On the continuum of transactionality versus deep belonging, how we experience it in the North and how we experience it in the South is very different. So when we pick up any competency, we are very sensitive to how does this transform in my cultural ethos. You look at customer service in the North and the concept of customer service in the South itself is so diverse.
Yeah.
And when we define customer service and its index, we take into account those cultural differences.
Very interesting. Thank you. And okay, my next question is that how important is emotional intelligence when it comes to leadership development?
I think it's very, very important. And emotional intelligence is a new word, I think, made very famous by Daniel Goleman somewhere in the early 2000s. Yeah. So this concept of social intelligence was given in 1920 by a psychologist called Thorndike. And he said it's one of the most important intelligences. Emotional intelligence is very important because all our behavior happens in a social context. So how we regulate our emotion, how we present our emotion, how we respond and react to triggers, all happens in a context where there are other people involved.
Right.
And that is where my sensitivity to a social context, the way I will demonstrate my behavior, becomes one of the most important cornerstones. But emotional intelligence is like a very big word. Within it are so many finer elements of emotional maturity, display, sensitivity, empathy. And each one of these is very, very important for success as a leader. So while people talk about emotional intelligence, it's not one thing. There are so many factors. If you look at the research, there are more than 14, 15 critical factors of emotional intelligence. Empathy is a big one that is being spoken to now.
Correct.
And the other thing I think that's made a difference is our interactions and the impact that we need to make today is in such short periods of time. Like even in our conversation today, you and I have 25 minutes to make an impact on each other. I don't have 2 days. So within those 20 minutes, how do I present? How do I regulate emotion? How do I decide what to react to is becoming more important.
Right.
Today, for leadership development, emotional intelligence is therefore more regarded because the time spans of interactions have reduced and the medium of interaction has reduced. WhatsApp, you can do very hurtful communication on WhatsApp, right? It's the worst method to communicate, but it is a medium of communication. Right. Emotional intelligence and how I respond to even a WhatsApp message has become important today because that is where my leadership effectiveness gets tested.
Great response. Thank you. I think my last question to you, and this is for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your deep understanding of organizational psychology and all the work that you have done, and given the fact that over 74% of our viewers and listeners are under 34, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want a lot of our viewers and listeners to take away from our conversation?
So at an individual level, what I would tell them is that you are a unique individual and your uniqueness is what needs to shine. You do not need to get averaged with anything. So it's very important to focus on the story that you tell yourself, about yourself, about the social context that has shaped you, and about your aspirations and dreams. And we should have absolutely no shyness in bringing our unique proposition out to the world.
Correct.
And we should resist getting boxed and bracketed. So even the word like Gen Z is a box, right? So don't think, oh, I'm Gen Z, I'm a millennial, I can do X. You're a unique person within that box with unique needs.
Yes.
So that would be my, one of the takeaways I'd like the audience to have. If this audience works in organizations, which I'm sure a lot of them do, then it is to say that everything that you are doing is impacting another human. So spend time understanding that human, whether it's your employee, customer, stakeholder, observe their behaviors, spend time meeting people and having conversations. Do not rely on technology as the only means to tell you how people think, behave. The cues that you will get when you do those market walks, when you spend time with your maintenance team on the ground, when you sit through that board meeting with your manager taking notes is inseparable, because what you learn about human behavior is what you will start applying to all your processes and design. So as much interaction you can do, the better your design and effectiveness will be.
Okay, very interesting.
Those will be the two.
Very, very interesting. And on that note, Radhika, and your wonderful lessons, and the first one is so powerful. Each one of us is unique. Don't get averaged out. Believe in yourself.
Yes.
The second, equally powerful, it is so critical to be able to understand other people you work with, because only through that understanding will relationships become much deeper. And I think that's such an important takeaway that everyone must have heard from Radhika. Thank you, Radhika, for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me about so many different aspects about organizational psychology. I think I learned many new things from you today. Thank you again.
So much, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.